Some men would never see another sunrise. They knew it before the engines even started. In the darkness, packed shoulder to shoulder inside steel landing craft, they gripped rifles with numb hands while cold seawater slapped against the hull. No speeches could erase the silence. No amount of training could quiet the question echoing through every mind. Who would still be alive when the ramp finally dropped? Beyond the black horizon waited a coastline transformed into a fortress. Concrete bunkers stared across the channel. Hidden artillery searched the sea. Miles of mines, barbed wire, and underwater obstacles waited for thousands of young men who had never before faced combat on this scale. Between them and Europe stood one of the most heavily defended shorelines in history. The crossing itself became a battle against fear. Wind whipped across the decks. Many soldiers fought seasickness before they ever faced the enemy. Faces disappeared beneath helmets, lowered against the rain and spray. Some checked family photographs one last time. Others quietly adjusted life jackets or reread letters folded into their pockets, carrying fragments of home toward a shore where nothing would ever feel familiar again. Behind this moment stood years of planning unlike anything the modern world had witnessed. Historians such as Stephen Ambrose and Anthony Beaver describe an operation built upon relentless preparation, deception, and extraordinary cooperation among allied nations. Official Allied planning documents reveal thousands of ships, aircraft, and vehicles assembled with astonishing precision, all synchronized toward a single objective that carried consequences far beyond France. American forces formed the largest share of the assault. Tens of thousands of U.S. soldiers would land on Utah and Omaha beaches, supported by massive naval bombardments, airborne divisions scattered across Normandy, and an industrial machine capable of sustaining an invasion across an ocean. Yet no amount of logistical brilliance could guarantee survival once the first bullets flew. Weather nearly changed everything. Meteorologists searched desperately for a narrow opening in violent Atlantic storms. According to the National World War II Museum and the U.S. Army Center of Military History, that fragile forecast persuaded General Dwight D. Eisenhower to make one of history's most consequential decisions. Delay and surprise might disappear, proceed, and thousands could die before reaching dry land. As darkness gave way to the faintest hint of dawn, the invasion was already underway long before the beaches appeared. American paratroopers drifted through cloud and gunfire into unfamiliar fields, many landing far from their objectives. Small groups, isolated and surrounded, began fighting almost immediately, unaware that their scattered actions would help shape the battle unfolding miles away along the coast. Cornelius Ryan and Rick Atkinson both describe the remarkable uncertainty that gripped commanders and soldiers alike. Perfect plans dissolved in fog, rough seas, and human unpredictability. Radios failed, units became separated, timetables slipped. Yet the immense machinery of Operation Overlord continued pushing forward, because turning back was no longer a realistic option. Then, through the morning mist, the coastline finally emerged. Dark bluffs rose above narrow strips of sand. The roar of naval guns rolled across the water. The men inside those crowded landing craft could now see the place that would define the rest of their lives, if they lived long enough to remember it. Even before the first landing craft touched the sand, war erupted across the coastline. Battleships offshore unleashed thunderous salvos that shook the sea itself, while cruisers and destroyers fired relentlessly toward German strongpoints carved into cliffs and reinforced with concrete. Above them, waves of Allied bombers disappeared into low clouds, their crews struggling against poor visibility that reduced the accuracy of many attacks, leaving numerous defensive positions dangerously intact. Inside the approaching craft, every explosion echoed through steel walls already slick with seawater. Diesel fumes mixed with the smell of wet canvas, engine oil, and fear. Soldiers could hear shells passing overhead but had no clear view of what awaited beyond the bow. Some crouched in silence. Others stared at the floor, conserving every ounce of courage for the moment the ramp would fall. The first American troops bound for Utah Beach encountered an unexpected advantage born from confusion. Powerful currents carried many landing craft south of their intended sectors. What might have become disaster instead placed thousands of soldiers opposite defenses that proved less formidable than planners had feared. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., landing with the first wave despite severe arthritis, calmly recognized the mistake. According to official U.S. Army histories and numerous eyewitness accounts, he chose not to redirect the assault under fire. Instead, he committed to the new location, making a decision that helped preserve momentum during one of the most complex amphibious operations ever attempted. Farther east, the situation unfolding at Omaha Beach could not have been more different. There, steep bluffs overlooked narrow stretches of sand, where German defenders retained much of their combat strength. As described by Stephen Ambrose, Anthony Beaver, and Cornelius Ryan, the preliminary bombardment had failed to destroy many fortified positions. Machine gun nests, artillery pieces, and mortars remained ready as the first American assault waves drew closer. The sea itself became another enemy. Rough surf, scattered formations, swamped landing craft, and overwhelmed specialized armored vehicles designed to support the infantry. Many sank before reaching shore, taking crews and equipment to the bottom. Soldiers burdened with rifles, ammunition, radios, and heavy packs struggled simply to remain above water. Some disappeared beneath the waves without ever firing a shot. Then came the sound nearly every survivor remembered for the rest of his life. The metallic crash of ramps dropping into the surf was answered almost instantly by concentrated gunfire. Bullets tore through steel, water, and flesh with terrifying speed. Men in the front ranks fell before they could take a single step. Others leaped into water far deeper than expected, fighting the current as explosions hurled columns of sand and seawater high into the air around them. Within minutes, carefully rehearsed plans began dissolving into countless individual struggles for survival. Small groups formed wherever officers, sergeants, or even ordinary soldiers managed to gather frightened men behind obstacles scattered across the beach. Smoke, dust, and constant shell fire reduced visibility until even short distances became impossible to judge. Radios failed, orders disappeared beneath the roar of battle. Initiative increasingly belonged not to headquarters, but to whoever could keep moving forward. Somewhere beyond that wall of fire, the fate of the invasion now depended on whether enough Americans could force a path off the beach before the defenders recovered completely. Some did exactly that. Crawling through surf, stained with sand and fuel, they found shelter behind steel obstacles, shingle banks, and the bodies of fallen comrades. Every few yards gained demanded extraordinary resolve. The open beach offered almost no protection, and German fire swept it from end to end with devastating precision. Yet amid the confusion, isolated acts of leadership began changing the course of the battle. Junior officers and non-commissioned officers gathered whoever they could find, often from different companies and even different divisions. Unit boundaries ceased to matter. According to the U.S. Army Center of Military History and Rick Atkinson, countless small assault groups emerged without waiting for formal orders, moving toward the bluffs wherever a gap seemed possible. Initiative replaced rigid planning. Survival depended on momentum. American destroyers soon made one of the boldest decisions of the day, Recognizing that troops were pinned to the shoreline, several captains ignored the dangers of shallow water and maneuvered astonishingly close to the coast. From barely 1,000 yards offshore, their naval guns fired directly into German strongpoints overlooking Omaha. Sailors watched shells strike bunkers that had resisted the earlier bombardment, while infantrymen below seized precious moments to advance. The fighting became intensely personal. Instead of vast formations, the battle fractured into dozens of desperate contests between small groups of Americans climbing narrow draws, shell craters, and steep embankments under relentless fire. Engineers blasted openings through wire. Riflemen covered one another from behind shattered obstacles. Flamethrowers, grenades, and demolition charges became essential against concrete defenses designed to withstand artillery. First-hand accounts collected by Stephen Ambrose and preserved by the National World War II Museum describe men who scarcely recognized the battlefield around them. Thick smoke drifted across the slopes. Dust from exploding shells filled the air until breathing itself became difficult. The deafening mixture of naval gunfire, artillery, and machine guns blurred into a single, continuous roar that seemed to erase any sense of time. Not every objective could be reached. Some assault teams were forced back repeatedly. Others vanished entirely after entering minefields or crossing exposed ground. Medical corpsmen moved from casualty to casualty despite being unarmed under the Geneva Convention, risking their lives with every step. Their courage saved countless wounded men who otherwise would never have left the beach alive. While Omaha demanded every reserve of determination, events elsewhere steadily strengthened the Allied foothold. On Utah Beach, American troops pushed inland faster than many planners had dared hope, linking with elements of the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, whose scattered landings had nonetheless disrupted German communications, delayed reinforcements, and captured critical bridges and road junctions. As Anthony Beaver notes, what initially appeared to be dangerous disorder often created tactical confusion for the defenders instead. Beyond the American sectors, British and Canadian forces fought equally fierce battles along Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches, confronting fortified villages, determined resistance, and costly counterattacks. Operation Overlord depended on every beachhead holding. A collapse anywhere threatened the entire invasion, making each local success part of a single struggle stretching across nearly 50 miles of Normandy's coastline. Even as isolated victories accumulated, no one on the beaches could see the larger picture. Company commanders had only fragments of information. Corps headquarters struggled with interrupted communications. General Omar Bradley, observing from offshore, received reports so alarming that he briefly questioned whether troops at Omaha could continue the assault. Official records reveal just how uncertain the outcome remained during those critical hours. Then, one by one, small groups reached the crest of the bluffs, carrying the battle beyond the beaches and into the maze of Norman fields, where an entirely different fight was about to begin. Beyond those hedgerows lay a landscape unlike anything most Allied soldiers had ever imagined. Ancient earthen banks, crowned with dense hedges and centuries-old trees, divided Normandy into countless enclosed fields that concealed every movement. Visibility shrank to mere yards. Tanks struggled through narrow lanes while infantry advanced cautiously, never knowing whether the next opening concealed frightened civilians or determined German defenders. What had begun as an amphibious assault now became a grinding battle for every field, orchard, and crossroads. According to Rick Atkinson and the U.S. Army Center of Military History, the bocage transformed superior Allied numbers and firepower into only part of the equation. Every advance demanded patience, adaptation, and relentless determination. American units improvised new tactics, modified tanks to cut through hedgerows, and learned, often at tremendous cost, how to fight in terrain that favored the defender. Meanwhile, engineers expanded fragile beachheads into lifelines. Ships unloaded an endless stream of ammunition, fuel, food and reinforcements despite rough seas and the constant threat of attack. Official Allied records reveal an astonishing logistical achievement. Within days, hundreds of thousands of troops, tens of thousands of vehicles, and vast quantities of supplies had crossed the English Channel, creating the foundation for an army capable of driving deep into occupied Europe. The cost remained staggering. Families on both sides of the Atlantic would soon receive telegrams that forever altered the course of their lives. Cemeteries in Normandy gradually filled with rows of white crosses and stars of David, each marking a story interrupted. First-hand accounts preserved by the National World War II Museum speak less about glory than about exhaustion, grief, and the quiet determination to continue despite unimaginable loss. The German High Command struggled to respond. Allied deception measures, including Operation Fortitude, had convinced many senior commanders that the main invasion might still come elsewhere. As Stephen Ambrose, Anthony Beevor, and Cornelius Ryan each document, those critical delays complicated Germany's ability to concentrate armored reserves against the Normandy bridgehead during the invasion's decisive opening days. Every hour gained on June 6th strengthened the Allied foothold. The campaign that followed would last far longer than many had expected. The breakout from Normandy demanded weeks of brutal combat before American forces, alongside British, Canadian, Free French, and other Allied armies, finally shattered German defenses. From there came the liberation of Paris, the advance across France, the crossing into Germany, and after months of fierce fighting still ahead, the collapse of the Third Reich. D-Day alone did not win the war, but it opened the Western Front that Nazi Germany could no longer permanently contain. History remembers June 6, 1944, not because it was flawless, but because thousands of ordinary people accepted extraordinary risk in pursuit of something larger than themselves. Sailors held their course through hostile seas. Air crews flew into darkness, uncertain of returning. Medics crossed open ground to reach the wounded. Engineers cleared obstacles under fire. Young soldiers, many barely out of school, kept moving even as everything around them urged them to stop. The beaches of Normandy are quieter now. The surf still rolls across Omaha and Utah. The wind still bends the grass above the bluffs where bunkers once overlooked the sea. Visitors may hear only waves and seabirds, yet beneath that silence rests the memory of one day when courage was measured not by the absence of fear, but by the decision to move forward despite it. The road that led to the liberation of Western Europe began there, one uncertain step at a time, carried by countless Allied hands, with American forces at the heart of an undertaking whose cost can never be separated from its achievement.